Hey guys, welcome to tonight's channel. We'll walk through rusted iron gates, down the cold hallways of castles that once burned bright like fire, then were abandoned in mist and time. This isn't just a story about stone walls, it's a story about power, oaths, and the price humanity pays for reaching toward eternity. Before we begin, if you love journeys that carry us through the past, where history blends with darkness, hit subscribe so you won't miss any of our nightly tales. And hey, where are you watching from? In a small room, on a warm bed, or while the city outside sleeps? What time does your clock show? Tell me in the comments below, because I believe every hour, every place, gives this story a different shade. Now, dim the lights, pull up your blanket, put on your headphones, relax your body, take a deep breath, and let your ears lead the way. Because tonight, the castles will speak again. Tonight is colder than usual. The wind blows through the rusted iron gate, making a sound like metal groaning beneath the weight of time. You stand before that gate, your hand brushing its icy surface, the faint layer of moss making it feel like the skin of something that has been asleep for hundreds of years. Behind it lies darkness. Not the ordinary kind of night, but a deep, thick shadow that swallows every trace of light, as if waiting for someone to step inside. Before you, the castle rises out of the mist, not a ruin, but a living creature breathing slowly, every crack in its walls like an ancient eye watching the stranger who dares to come near. They say that on winter nights, when the wind howls through, the stones tell their stories through cold, through whispers, through silences long enough to make your bones ache. And tonight, you are standing where it all begins. No one knows exactly when this castle was built, only that every stone in its wall once belonged to something else. Old fortresses, fallen churches, even ancient tombs. It is a child of centuries, pieced together by human ambition and the blood of those who served it. Some say even its foundations are restless. Beneath them are deep chambers, where the wind never stops, where whispers never fade. Standing before it, you feel like you're looking at the face of time itself, beautiful and merciless. The wind pushes the gate open, its hinges crying out like voices in pain. You step forward, your feet meeting the cold stone floor, your breath turning into a thin mist. Every step echoes not loud, but enough to make you realize this place remembers. It hears you. It remembers the sound of human footsteps. Maybe for years it has been waiting for someone to return just to finish the story the world forgot. Because castles, like people, don't die the moment they're abandoned. They die slowly, in silence, until no one remembers their name. And when someone like you walks in, memory stirs again, tiptoeing back through the air. Outside, the wind grows stronger, urging you deeper inside. Wet grass brushes your legs, and the scent of damp stone and iron fills the air. The scent of places that have witnessed more than any living soul should see. A single owl glides from the high roof, its wings brushing the darkness, leaving behind a faint rustle like a whispered greeting. Above, the moon hides half behind clouds, its silver light cutting through a broken window, leaving streaks across the wall like claw marks. The sight isn't beautiful, but it pulls you in like staring at a secret untouched for too long. Every stone here has seen vows spoken, lives ended, and dreams turning to dust. When you place your hand on the wall, you can feel a faint pulse beneath the moss, as if blood still flows within the stone. They say a castle is never truly silent. Beneath the layers of rock, something always moves, not a creature, but memory, thousands of murmurs pressed together through the ages. Some have come here before, recording, taking pictures, then leaving. But when they play back the recordings, there's always a second voice, low, steady, repeating their words. Tonight, you don't need a recorder, just your ears and a little courage. Because some stories are told only once, and whoever hears them carries them forever. You take a deep breath and realize the chill isn't from the wind anymore, it's coming from within the walls. An ancient breath, one that has witnessed blood spilled and wine poured, that once heard vows spoken by trembling lips afraid to die. The great door before you trembles slightly, as if a hand were pressing from the other side. And then, the story begins. Not in my voice, but in the sound of this place itself. Step inside. Don't be afraid. What remains of time won't hurt you, it only wants you to listen, because every castle has a soul. and that soul is waking up. You push the heavy door open, its long creak blending with the cold air before falling silent, as if the castle itself had swallowed the sound. Inside, it's pitch black, with only a faint line of light slipping through the crack behind you, glinting on the thick layer of dust covering the stone floor. The air is heavy, ancient. Each breath feels worn, as if time itself is eroding it. You step slowly, hearing the crunch beneath your shoes, echoes rising from somewhere within the walls, spreading like the footsteps of someone following behind. The wind slips through broken windows, carrying the damp scent of moss and decayed wood. Once, torches must have burned bright here, lighting grand feasts and laughter, but now all that remains is shadow and the ashes of memory. Above you, the ceiling's plaster has peeled away, revealing old wooden beams, the pride of long-dead craftsmen now bent and weary, like the ribs of a dying creature. A strong gust rushes down the hall, tearing apart thick webs, carrying with it the scent of ash and rusted iron. You stop, lifting your gaze into the darkness ahead. Under the lonely moonlight spilling through the arched window, dust drifts like mist, floating slowly in the dense air, making every movement feel heavier, slower. There's a strange feeling as if you're no longer the one entering, but the one being watched. The cold stone brushes your shoulder, the chill seeping through your clothes, running down your spine. Somewhere, you hear a faint dripping, steady, patient, unclear whether it's from a broken pipe or a crack in the ceiling. Each drop falls like a countdown, pulling you deeper into a place that has forgotten time. In the dim light, you see an old painting, its wooden frame split apart. The figure in it is a man in a fur coat, eyes sharp and cold, but through the dust he looks as though he's crying. The colours have faded, leaving only those dark eyes, following you, heavy with unshed grief. You take a few more steps. The stone floor creaks beneath you, and you stop at the end of the hall. There stands a tall wooden door, dark and half open beyond it, a depth of blackness. You hold your breath and listen. No human sound, only wind twisting through the cracks, the hinges' soft groan, and somewhere far away, the faint rustle of silk. The air thickens, the scent of moss grows stronger, wet and metallic. The chill around you shifts as if the castle is breathing in. In that moment, your heartbeat fades, and you feel the stones around you exhale. A faint sound above soft, like footsteps crossing an old wooden stair. You look up, seeing only the ceiling dappled in pale light. The sound stops, then resumes steady, deliberate, familiar. What you feel isn't fear, but awareness of being watched, tested, as if the castle itself is studying you, to see if you're brave enough to listen to its story. You brush your hand along the wall, dust slipping down your fingers, leaving a silver streak under the moonlight. The wall quivers slightly, and a faint sound stirs, not the wind, but something closer to a sigh. You pull your hand back. The cold clings to your skin, but inside you, curiosity burns stronger than fear. Something is waiting, not someone, but memory. In this darkness, the castle still keeps the soul of its years, echoes of laughter, of arguments, of steel striking against wine cups. Now, only your footsteps remain, echoing down the corridor, long and thin as a thread. You move toward a wall where the window has shattered. Moonlight spills in, slicing the floor with angled beams, making the floating dust shimmer like a swarm of glowing insects. The wind hums through the cracks, mingling with faint hissing, and for a moment you think you can hear words, an ancient language, unintelligible but full of meaning. Regret, longing, the ache of waiting. You close your eyes, and for an instant, it feels like a hand brushes your shoulder. When you open them again, only mist drifts through the window. But right then, you understand the place isn't dead, it's asleep, and you're the first to wake it after centuries. Outside, the moon grows rounder, brighter, and streaks of silver light draw the outlines of those who once lived here. Some smile, some cry, some fade into mist. And in that moment, as you stare into the darkness at the end of the hall, you realize every gust of wind, every chill that passes through the air, is a greeting from those who once called this place home. People often say that every castle has a reason to be born, but just like people, they don't get to choose how they are forgotten. As you stand in that cold, breathless space, a question begins to form in your mind. Why did structures so magnificent, once the beating hearts of their time, end up as ruins? Why do the walls that once sheltered kings now hold only moss and silence? That question isn't just curiosity from someone seeking history. It's the whisper of the place itself, speaking to anyone brave enough to listen. Perhaps, in every stone, there is still the memory of the hands that built it, calloused, dusty hands, trembling in the cold wind. They built something meant to last forever, not knowing that eternity is the heaviest curse. Because anything created to defy time will sooner or later be punished by it. Every castle is a dream turned to stone, a dream of power, of glory, of carving one's name into history. But history is a predator. It keeps only what hurts. Everything that once burned bright, it swallows whole, leaving only ashes and shadow. When you look around and see the collapsed frames, the hallways swallowed by moss, you'll understand. This isn't just decay, it's consequence. The castle, that symbol of power, was built from fear, the fear of losing that power. They are suits of armor made of stone, wrapped around fragile hearts that could not accept that all things fade. People didn't build castles to live, they built them to prove they existed. They poured sweat, blood, and the souls of generations into every block, believing that when they died, their names would echo in the walls. But perhaps that was the very moment the castle began to die. Because when something is born not to protect, but to defy death itself, it already carries the seed of its own rot. You can imagine it the first day the gates opened, cheers echoing through the valley, candlelight gleaming off the high ceilings, music swelling in the grand hall as the master of the house raised his head, believing he had built something that would make the world bow. But the world doesn't bow. It waits. It waits for the footsteps to fade, for silence to reclaim each room, for laughter to turn to cracks in the wall. And one day, the first wind blows through, a door nudges the wall, a painting falls, and so, the forgetting begins slow, silent, unstoppable. You look up at the high ceiling, where moonlight still clings to layers of dust. Maybe hundreds of years ago, someone else stood here, looking at that same light, wondering if the castle would still stand after they were gone. The answer is before you, not in the broken walls, but in how they still stand, even when no one belongs to them anymore. Castles are abandoned, not because they are weak, but because people change. When wars end, when grand dreams lose their meaning, people leave, taking with them the breath and soul of the place. They leave behind empty rooms, unfinished feasts, vows left unspoken, and the castle built to be immortal begins to live the life of the forgotten. Perhaps the walls still remember the footsteps, perhaps the towers still wait for candlelight, but no one returns to bring them back to life. In the dark, you hear the wind whistling through the cracks like the stone itself sighing. That isn't the sound of ruin. It's the sound of a story being told, a story of pride, of guilt, of the price of ambition. If you listen long enough, you'll realize the castle wasn't abandoned only in body, but in soul. No one ever truly left, they're just trapped within what they created. And now, people like you, who walk in, are only replacements, briefly filling the void history left behind. Because no castle truly dies. They only sleep waiting for someone curious or foolish enough to wake them with a single question. The question you just whispered into the cold, dark air. Why were they left behind? Then, you'll hear the answer not from me, but from the place itself. A distant echo, deep and cold, rising from beneath the stone. Because mankind cannot live forever with what they are afraid to lose. To understand why the castles that once blazed with glory now lie in cold ashes, we have to return to their beginning, to the time when people believed power could be carved into stone, and that greatness could live forever if built with blood, sweat, and vows. Back then, every castle wasn't just a dwelling, but a symbol of a lineage, a declaration sent straight to the heavens that said, "We exist, and we will not bow." The masters of these fortresses believed they could imprison history within their walls, that every stone they laid down carried a fragment of their soul. When you look up at the towers piercing the sky, don't think of them as mere architecture, they are the fingers of humankind, reaching out to defy fate. Every thick wall, every long corridor was an affirmation. I am strong, I am eternal, I will stand when all else falls. But nothing is truly eternal. When the first stones were laid, blood already soaked the ground, not the blood of enemies, but of the builders. They worked until the bones of their hands broke through their skin, until their backs curved like the arches they raised. The sound of hammers, hammer, 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 echoed day and night, blending with the murmur of prayers. It was said that every castle was born from an oath, and the price of that oath was always a soul. Many builders never returned after their work was done. Some said they were entombed within the walls to seal the power. Others said they went willingly, believing that dying within their creation was the only way to live forever. Beneath flickering candlelight, nobles sat in their great halls, red wine shimmering in silver cups. Their hands touched the stone, and they believed they were touching eternity. Outside, the poor looked up at the glowing towers, both fearful and envious, for in that light they saw clearly the line dividing men and gods. Each castle was its own cathedral, a closed kingdom where power burned like an endless fire. But no fire, no matter how bright, burns without consuming something. And that something was people. In every wall, in every heavy stone, there are the breaths of thousands who were drained dry, forced to believe their suffering was sacred. When you touch the cold stone, you're touching their bones and sweat. They are the invisible parts of the grandeur that lords once boasted of. In those days, castles were not just shelters, they were proclamations to the world that we can rule over nature, towers to see farther than others, walls to defy war, depths to hide secrets. But deeper still, a castle was a mirror of humanity's belief that it could build its own heaven. A heaven with high walls, guards, and a throne. And when they believed in it long enough, they no longer saw the sin in blood, only the glow of glory. They called it greatness. But in truth, it was fear, the fear of being forgotten, of being small, of turning to dust. That fear made them build higher, deeper, thicker, until they buried themselves in their own creations. Some say castles are the most beautiful tombs mankind ever built. And indeed, if you listen closely, you can still hear the breath of those who once called themselves immortal, now just echoes of the dreams they built. Every stone, every stair, is proof of that madness, the belief that power could outlast time. But time has no rival. It only stands outside, patient, smiling. Because when the final tower is raised, when the master of the house sits upon his throne, wrapped in velvet and pride, lifting his cup to the heavens, that is the moment the castle begins to die. Not from war, not from weather, but from its own birth, from being built to defy death itself. A creation born of fear will inevitably be consumed by it. Now, as you walk through the ruins, hearing the wind whistle through broken frames, remember, it was once the sound of celebration. When you see a cracked dome, know that someone once knelt beneath it, swearing loyalty. And when you touch the cold wall, don't just feel stone, feel the hands that placed it there, believing they were building eternity. Eternity, in truth, is just a beautiful word for the obsession not to disappear. And a castle, in all its grandeur, is nothing more than a question carved in stone. A question humanity has never truly answered. Does anything really last forever? When the final walls were raised and the hammers fell silent, a new age began, the age of war and fear. Because no castle was ever built merely to be admired. They were born to resist, to endure, to survive amid blood and steel. Every stone was laid not for warmth, but to block a blade. Every tower was built not just to see far, but to spot death before it arrived. In those years, people lived with a constant dread that any sunrise could be their last. Outside, battles never ceased. Inside, the castle became a fortress of power, of the belief that strength could replace peace. You can almost imagine a morning in such a fortress. The pounding of drums, the gates opening, horses screaming, guards changing shifts, and the smell of boiling oil mixed with metal. In the courtyard, soldiers trained, sweat and blood mixing into the mud, their eyes hard as the walls themselves. Each man was a living stone, and the fortress was made of their bones. High above, the rulers looked down. They believed themselves safe within their stronghold, that fear lived only out there, in the screams of the battlefield. But the truth is, that fear had never left the walls. It had been mixed into the mortar long ago. When night came, torches flickered along the corridors, casting the guards' shadows on the walls, making the whole castle seem alive. In the dungeons, the hiss of wind blended with the creak of chains where traitors were kept, where dynastic secrets were buried. War made the castle come alive, but it was a kind of life strangled by its own fear. No one truly slept. Soldiers feared enemies, lords feared rebellion, and townsfolk feared the horns of alarm. The higher the walls rose to keep enemies out, the tighter they trapped those within. The more they tried to protect themselves, the deeper they buried themselves in stone. It's said that on stormy nights you could hear the gasping breaths of soldiers who fell not on the battlefield, but in the courtyard itself, collapsing from exhaustion while guarding something that was never theirs. In the grand halls, feasts were held, wine red as blood. The master of the house laughed, but his eyes always glanced toward the door. He knew that one day the sound of hooves would come not from within, but from beyond the gates. And then everything he built to preserve his life would become his prison. In war, the castle was not just a refuge, it was a tool of control. From within these walls, orders to kill were given. From here, blood flowed across the plains, and like every tool born of fear, it began to turn on its master. As the wars dragged on, the fortresses grew heavier, thicker, but inside they grew colder, darker. Every door was reinforced, every window shrunk, until sunlight could no longer enter. Those who lived inside no longer knew the shape of dawn, only torchlight and alarm bells. Fear no longer came from outside, it became the air itself, seeping into the walls, the beds, the breath. People in the castle said that sometimes the wind howled through the cracks like weeping. They blamed ghosts, but in truth, it was the echo of their own souls trapped within the stone shells they called home. One old record tells of a northern castle where a young king ordered walls so thick that no one could ever break through. He believed he would be immortal inside his fortress. But that winter, when war came, the enemy could not breach the walls and he could not escape them. Hunger arrived before the swords did. Those inside the castle died one by one, their screams fading into silence. When the gates were finally opened, only skeletons remained, leaning against the walls, the crown lying beneath the throne. That was the first lesson of the stone fortresses. You cannot build eternity from fear. The castle, meant to protect, had become the most beautiful coffin its maker could have imagined. And when you look at the crumbling ruins today, remember they did not fall to time, but to the human heart. What breaks stone is not wind or rain, but pride and fear eating it from within. And so, even as you stand before a ruin, you can still feel the chill on your skin not from the earth, but from centuries of war that never quite faded. A reminder that every fortress of power is built from fear, and fear is never eternal. When the final war trumpet fell silent, people thought peace had returned. But within the cold stone walls, another battle began, the battle of the human heart. With no enemy left outside, men turned their blades inward, fighting each other with glances, with schemes, with desire. The castle, once a fortress of survival, slowly became a place of luxury and sin. The candles no longer burned for victory, but for feasts. In the great hall, where weapons once filled every corner, red carpets now stretched wide, crystal chandeliers hung glittering, and the sounds of lutes and laughter echoed endlessly. The red wine flowed like blood, never running dry, and people forgot that real blood had once soaked into this stone floor. At every banquet table, beneath each gold-embroidered cloth, lay secrets even God turned away from. Those who once fought side by side now sat together, laughing loudly, hiding knives behind their smiles. Every toast was a disguise for ambition. Behind the thick walls, power and desire intertwined, quietly choking what remained of the human soul. No one remembered war anymore, they only remembered nights of endless feasting, where wine and sin became one indistinguishable stream. When the music played, no one heard the horns or the horses anymore, only the clink of glasses, the soft laughter, and the sighs between. In that setting, the castle began to change its scent, not of iron, but of incense mixed with dying flowers. Beneath the golden domes, people quietly died within themselves. Perhaps that was the true tragedy of power. It did not come from outside the gate, but was born within the house that held it. When war ended, emptiness moved in. With no enemies left to kill, people killed time with games, with pleasure. The nobles began searching for ways to fight their boredom, and that was when the true darkness spread through the halls. The nights in the castle were no longer quiet. The music still played, but slow, dragging like a dying breath. Some danced until their feet bled, refusing to stop, as if trying to forget that the world outside was changing, while all they had left was the shell of old glory. Every laugh in the great hall was a lie. Every kiss, a broken vow. People began seeing things, or rather, the castle began reflecting itself. The flickering candles painted trembling shapes on the walls, twisting and dancing like the souls of those who died in war. No one dared to look closely, afraid to see their own face among them. In the farthest room, a young woman in white stood by the window, where the moonlight touched the stone like pale skin. They said she was the widow of the previous lord, forced to live here so she wouldn't reveal royal secrets. Every night, she stood there, no tears, no words, just watching the lake below, where the moonlight shattered into 1,000 pieces on the wind. One night, during a feast, she vanished. Only her white shoes remained on the stairs, and a trail of water leading outside. The next morning, the lake was covered with a thin layer of ice. Beneath it, a shadow, human-shaped, but no one dared to name it. From that day on, no one opened the windows facing the lake again. They said, when the wind blows, you can still hear silk brushing against stone, like footsteps passing through the halls at night. But no one wants to look, because whoever looks dreams of a tear falling on their neck. After that, the feasts continued, but cracks formed in the laughter. They still drank, still sang, but no one got drunk anymore. The candles no longer bright enough to chase away the growing darkness that crept into every wall. The castle's splendor became a mask, and like every mask, the more beautiful it was, the more terrifying it became. Some began to whisper that the castle was feeding on those who lived inside it. It devoured fear, swallowed laughter, and gave back silence. One night, the music stopped mid-song. The musician sat still, eyes wide, fingers frozen on the strings. No one dared to touch him until the candles burned out and he fell over, dead from fear. No one knew what he saw, but from that night, the song was never played again. The castle, once protector of human souls, had become their tormentor. And like everything built upon power and desire, it began to take revenge. In the silence of the night, you can almost imagine the echo's distant laughter, a glass shattering, a string snapping, then nothing, only the cold. A cold that did not come from the wind, but from the stone itself, a stone that had drunk enough blood, wine, and tears to awaken. That was when people realized the castle was not built only of stone, but of sin. And sin, whether gilded in gold or wrapped in velvet, always carries the scent of death. No curse ever begins with a scream, it always begins with an oath. And in the old castles, where every stone was built with ambition and blood, those oaths never truly slept. They swore loyalty, protection, faithfulness. But then, beneath the glow of candles and the shimmer of gold, those oaths began to crack, little by little. Not because of enemies, but because of the human heart. On a stormy night, thunder rolling across the roof, they say the Count of the castle stood in the great hall, raised his cup, and declared, "No one can take away what I have built. Not even God." Everyone laughed, but no one met his eyes. There was something strange in his voice, a defiance that made the candle flames tremble, as if afraid. And not long after, the oath was broken. Betrayal came not from outside, but from within. A servant, the one he trusted most, opened the gates in the night and let the rebels in. When blood spilled across the stairs, the Count still didn't understand that the castle was fulfilling his own vow to protect itself, no matter who its master was. The great doors slammed shut. The locks fell into place, trapping him inside. By morning, when the villagers came, they found his body in the great hall, surrounded by spilled wine and extinguished candles. On the wall, where blood had splattered, there were marks unclear if they were cracks or writing. But when looked at closely, they formed a spiral, the same shape locals called the Eye of Vengeance. From that day, the castle was said to be cursed. They claimed anyone who betrayed within these walls would die before ever leaving them. Strange thing was, generation after generation, similar deaths followed. One heir was found hanging in the watchtower, another dead at the foot of the stairs, eyes wide open, staring up as if something had dragged him down. Some said that at night they heard tapping on the walls, 3 short knocks, 3 long ones, the old signal of the soldiers during the rebellion. The elders whispered that it was how the souls of false oath-takers called to each other. Each stone, they said, held a memory, and when night fell, they murmured what had once happened. Those who lived nearby told of nights when moonlight shone through the broken archway, casting a beam across the great hall, and whoever looked into it would see a figure standing there, even though the room was empty. Many fled, leaving the castle to moss and time. But those who once lived there all agreed on one thing: the more you try to escape it, the more it appears in your dreams. Some monks claimed it was the price of arrogance, that when a man dared to challenge God, his castle was condemned to live forever with that sin. But others believed the count's soul still lingered, trapped within the stone, guarding his unfinished vow. They said that during storms, when lightning struck the tower, a light would flicker from the highest window, the very place he last stood. The villagers called it the candle of the oath, a flame that never died, flaring only when someone, somewhere, betrayed their own promise. Another legend spoke of a stonemason, sealed alive within the wall near the castle's completion, a ritual to bind the soul to the stone. They said his final breath still rides the wind, and whenever someone lies inside the castle, that wind howls through the corridor, dropping the temperature until every candle goes out. Since then, this place has not been a home, but a mirror reflecting every sin. Anyone who enters hears something calling them, sometimes a dead loved one's voice, sometimes their own, repeating words they never spoke aloud. Some wake in the night to find a figure beside their bed, finger pressed to its lips, signaling silence. They say the figure's face looks exactly like the Count's. After that night, those people leave and never return. From then on, another rumor spread. The castle doesn't just punish betrayal, it tests loyalty. Those who are true to themselves hear the wind sing. Those who aren't hear the weeping. Every sound, the knocks, the whispers, the moans is the castle's way of asking, are you honest with what you swore? And if the answer is no, you will never find your way out. That is the essence of a curse. It doesn't come from outside, but from within. The castle is only a mirror. It doesn't create sin, it only reflects it, until you destroy yourself trying not to see. They say one phrase was once carved into the iron railing, written in blood. I betrayed no one except myself. And perhaps that is the true curse, the oath broken from within the human heart. They say that among hundreds of legends about castles once glorious and later cursed, there is one story that even the storytellers fall silent upon hearing. It begins with a count who chose to build his castle upon a land no villager dared to step on, a forgotten graveyard, buried beneath layers of mist and wild grass. He said it was a land that already knew silence, and that was enough to build something eternal. People warned him that the land had once been the place of execution for a burned heretical sect, that every stone there still held the final prayers of those who died in the flames. But the Count only laughed. If their souls remain, he said, then my castle will be guarded forever. And so the construction began. Instead of stone from mountain quarries as was tradition, he ordered his men to dig deep into the graveyard itself, taking the engraved stones from the ground, washing them in animal blood, and stacking them in silence. With each stone laid, he had the drums beaten 3 times to wake the soul of the stone. Workers laboured in absolute quiet, no words, no holy symbols, no crosses allowed. Many later claimed that as they dug through the black soil, they heard something like breathing, as if the earth itself protested. Some fled. Some went mad, swearing they saw dry, bony hands reaching out from the mud. But the Count refused to stop. He believed true power could only be earned by claiming the places even the gods feared to touch. That winter, the castle was completed. On the day of its inauguration, the Count held a grand feast, inviting nobles from every neighbouring land. The great hall glowed with candlelight, filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of silver goblets. No one remembered this had once been a graveyard, for under the golden light, everything shone with a magnificence that mocked heaven itself. But when midnight came, the wind rose, and a strange trumpet sounded from the courtyard. At first, they thought it was part of the celebration, but no musician stood to claim it. Then the candles began to flicker, the flames trembling like frightened eyes. One guest, a scholar of old rites, suddenly turned pale. He whispered that the tune was not a call of triumph but a soul calling, a melody played only during funerary rites. The Count laughed, raising his cup, declaring that no ghost could dare disturb what he owned. But before his words could fade, the great doors of the hall burst open. A freezing wind roared in, snuffing out every torch and candle. In the dark, someone fell. Glass shattered. A scream echoed through the stone, and then silence. When light was finally restored, the Count still stood, but his cloak was covered in fine white dust, the ash of something burned, as if someone had poured the remnants of a pyre upon him. The feast ended in chaos. Guests fled for the gates, but none could leave. The iron gate stood heavy, unmoving, as though a hand unseen held it shut. Only when dawn came did it open, and in the centre of the courtyard stood a new stone slab, one that hadn't been there before. Upon its surface were symbols no one could read, carved deep and cold. The Count ordered it destroyed, but when the hammers struck, the sound that came out was hollow, like hitting flesh instead of stone. From then on, the castle changed. Each full moon, the trumpet sounded again. The faint scent of smoke lingered through the halls, and sometimes a figure in ancient executioner's robes, grey cloak, face covered, torch burning blue, was seen walking the corridors. One servant said that whenever the figure passed, every candle died and the windows misted as if the air itself froze. The nearby villagers abandoned the area, leaving the castle alone amidst a field of ash. The Count withdrew from the world. He held no more feasts, spoke to no one, and locked himself in his chambers. One night, his scream echoed through the walls. "Who's there? Leave me!" The only answer was a soft tapping on the wall. 3 short knocks, 3 long, the same signal soldiers once used in the night of rebellion long ago. When they broke down his door, the room was empty. The window was open, the wind carrying swirls of white ash. On the table stood a single silver goblet, filled with ash and specks of dried blood. After that night, the castle was abandoned. Yet every winter, when the fog falls thick and the moon turns full, the old trumpet can still be heard slow, steady, and mournful, like a warning from the dead. The elders say that if you walk too close when you hear that sound, the ground opens into dark pits, and in them, eyes that have never closed still watch. And the castle still stands, never crumbling, never aging, only colder each year, as if the earth beneath it still remembers how to breathe. They say that after the Count vanished, the castle fell into absolute silence for many years. No flame burned in the great hall, no footsteps dared echo through the corridors. But on the 7th winter after that night, the villagers from nearby began to see a flickering light in the highest tower window. At first, they thought it was a thief seeking shelter, but as they approached, they saw something that chilled them to the bone. The light never went out, and when they looked closer, it seemed to burn inside the wall, not on a table, not in a lantern, but between the cold stones themselves. Those brave enough to enter said that in the dark, they could hear faint breathing, whispers like a person praying. Some said it was the wind, but the wind doesn't know how to call the names of the dead. They swore that when walking through the eastern corridor once the execution chamber, they heard the drag of iron chains, and sometimes thick black liquid oozed from the walls like sap. When touched, it was freezing cold but smelled of iron, of blood, of souls that hadn't yet dispersed. As time went on, the strange happenings grew stronger. Candles in the great hall always went out when someone prayed. Mirrors in the guest rooms fogged at midnight, reflecting not the person standing before them, but another face, pale, lips sealed, eyes wide open, as if trying to speak. The castle was like a living body, and each wall, each doorway, was a vein carrying the memories of the trapped souls. People believed that when the Count built this fortress over the ancient graveyard, he hadn't just taken the stones, he had awakened something. The burned souls, the unfinished prayers, all became fused into the stone. When the fire that once consumed their flesh died, their final breaths soaked into the air, then into the rock, into each brick. And so, they could never leave, turning the castle into a vast cage of spirits. Someone once tried to exorcise it. A young priest came, carrying a silver cross and holy water, and stayed overnight in the great hall. He prayed for 3 hours, his voice echoing through the thick walls. But when dawn came, Only the broken cross was found lying on the floor, split clean in two, and the priest was gone. In the place where he had knelt, there was a grey human-shaped patch of ash. But worse, carved across the ash in letters sharp, as if cut by a blade, were the words, "We have not been buried." After that, no one dared speak of salvation again. The castle became a place only the desperate would approach. Murderers came, hoping to hide within its walls, and vanished as if swallowed whole. Treasure hunters came seeking the Count's gold, bringing ropes, lanterns, and compasses. They went in, but no one ever saw them come out. The only thing left behind were footprints in the dust, stopping abruptly in the middle of the floor, as if they had simply dissolved into the air. The old villagers said that when you hear footsteps following yours in the castle, it's not your imagination, it's one of the souls still walking, unaware it has died. They wander the same path forever, never leaving the walls. On bright moonlit nights, people claim to see a figure in the highest window thin, holding a candle, hair drifting in the wind. But when they came closer, the window was empty. The wind would pass through the cracks, making a sound like dry laughter, sliding through the night before fading away. Some researchers once visited with equipment, measuring electromagnetic fields, recording sound. They said something was inside the walls, because their devices always picked up a faint murmur, whispers in an ancient, unknown language. One of them reported that while standing in the great hall, he felt someone standing right behind him, breathing against his neck, a mix of ash, burnt wood, and blood. When he turned, he saw only a cracked wall, and inside the crack, an eye. Not a painting, but a real eye, wet and deep, staring straight at him until he collapsed. After that, they left, abandoning the place to fog and forgetfulness. But forgetfulness cannot bring peace. The trapped souls remain, walking the halls, sitting by the windows, waiting for someone to enter. They say that if you pass by the castle on a moonlit night, don't look directly into its windows because you might see them. Not to frighten you, but to ask you to say one thing for them. We have not been buried. And if you answer, if you stop to listen, you will never return. Because at that moment, you've become part of the castle, a new soul in the stone, repeating the same path as those before, waiting for someone else to walk in and hear your voice. Then time passed, war faded, blood dried on the walls, and new generations grew up without understanding why that place once terrified an entire land. All they saw was an old castle standing alone in a field of mist, its sharp towers swallowed by clouds, as if it had never known the warmth of life. When peace came, fortresses lost their meaning. The castle was no longer a bastion of war, and no one powerful enough remained to sit upon its warm throne. The grand doors, once open to welcome returning armies, now swung only for the wind and falling leaves. The iron gate rusted, the stone steps sank deep with the footprints of generations long dead. No more drums, no more hoofbeats or warning bells, only the howling of wind through the towers, and the creak of branches scraping the walls, making a sound like a forgotten guest knocking to come home. And so, the castle became meaningless. It had no purpose to stand, no one to protect, no reason to awaken each dawn. All that had once been its soul, the voices, the music, the clash of steel, was swept away by the wind. People began to leave. First the servants, then the guards, then the last master, taking whatever could be sold, leaving behind nothing but cold walls. When the final footsteps echoed past the gate, the castle seemed to exhale a long, hollow sigh of relief. From then on, it began to age not by years, but by solitude turned solid. Rain fell, water crept into cracks, winter came, ice spilled through the corridors. No footsteps, no breath, only silence, the kind so deep you could hear the stones shrink from the cold. The villagers called it the season when the stones sleep. But what they didn't know was that in that sleep, the castle still dreamed. It dreamed of its golden days, when torches lit the great hall, when laughter echoed beneath vaulted ceilings. It dreamed of rainy afternoons, when people gathered by the hearth to tell stories. And in its dream, it still saw its old master walking away, cloak billowing, hand brushing the wall as if to say goodbye. But dreams end, and reality returns. Only wind and dust remain. Some say a castle, once forgotten, loses its soul. But the truth is the opposite. When humans leave, its soul finally awakens. No longer commanded, no longer ruled, It becomes itself a lonely being, breathing through mist, watching the world through broken windows. At night, the moon hangs above the tower, shining through dust-frosted glass, across decayed curtains, creating illusions of people passing by. Many say they've seen shapes moving there, a soldier walking down the hall, a maid holding a lamp, a faint song echoing from the music room. No one knows if they're ghosts, or just the castle remembering itself. Castles were built to hold people, but when people leave, they still remain not in flesh but in shadow. Every gust of wind through the door is a fragment of memory. Every drop of water from the ceiling is an old breath repeated. Step inside now, and you'll see objects that seem still alive. A chair still facing the fireplace, a dusty harp with one string unbroken, a silver cup lying on the table, tilted, as if someone just left the feast. Everything is frozen mid-action, as though time itself stopped the moment the last door closed. And that is what makes the castle terrifying. It hasn't died. It just stands still between two worlds, between life and forgetting. Those who visited say they could hear their own heartbeat echo from the stone walls, steady, cold, as if something behind the wall was repeating it. Some dream they are sitting in the great hall, surrounded by people in cloaks, smiling, lifting glasses, calling their names. But when they awaken, only dust and fog remain. When the world outside changed, when wars ended, when humans no longer needed fortresses, the castle became the one left behind. It is the remnant of a time that no longer fits in the present, a monument to the past, bound to its own silence. But silence is not death. Sometimes, silence is how a soul outlives all the noise of mankind. And if you stand long enough before its gate, at dusk, when the sun is only a red smear on the stone tower, you'll feel what the old ones called the breath of the wall. A faint, cold current of air, carrying the scent of ancient ash. It brushes your neck, as if the castle itself were softly asking, "Do you come to stay, or just to pass through?" And if you answer wrong, perhaps you too will become part of it. A new memory, a new soul, in the long sleep of stone. When the war was over and new generations were born, the people who remained in the region began calling the castle by a different name. The House of Solitude. No one knows who first said it. But perhaps they understood well that power, the very thing that once made this place shine, was now the reason it stood empty. For decades no one came near it, except for a few curious visitors, the kind who believed in ghosts only to prove they didn't exist. But all of them said the same strange thing. There were no birds singing, no animals living near its walls, not even the grass grew thick. It spread thinly, as if afraid to touch the ground beneath it. The castle stood there, in the middle of the cold plains, tall yet isolated, as if it had chosen solitude itself. Every road leading to it ended in silence. Anyone who had ever lived nearby told the same story. They could feel an invisible gaze coming from the castle, even from miles away. On clear nights, when the moonlight struck the highest window, people claimed to see a figure sitting there motionless, sleepless, watching, like a keeper of the past. A few young nobles, enchanted by the legend of the old count, once tried to live there again. They believed that if they could awaken the castle, they might restore its old glory. And so, they moved in. The first day was peaceful. The wind blowing through the iron gate sounded like an old man's sigh. But by the third night, they began to hear echoes. Footsteps following them. Whispers from the great hall when no one was there. One of them, a young man named Edouard, said that whenever he stood before the mirror, his reflection wouldn't look at him. It looked behind him, as if seeing someone else approach. The feeling of being watched robbed them of sleep. They didn't dare separate, but they didn't dare sit close either. One night, when the fog was thick, Edouard left his room, following a faint light down the hall. He said he heard someone singing a woman's voice, distant and weak. He followed it to the northern tower, once the chamber of the woman from legend. The door opened on its own, and inside the dust-covered room, he found an old mirror split in half, one side reflecting him, the other side empty. But from that empty side came a cold draught, as if someone had just passed through. By morning, Edouard was gone. Only his coat remained, hanging over the railing, and faint handprints on the dusty window, facing outward, as if someone had stood there, looking down into the abyss. The other two left without a word. They never spoke of it again, but both claimed that since leaving the castle, they could not look into a mirror without trembling. One couldn't sleep. The other went mad, saying that every night he heard the woman's voice singing his name, even though he had never told anyone that name while there. And so, once again, the castle was abandoned. Solitude returned. But something had changed. The stone walls began to crack, not from weather but as if something inside wanted to get out. The fractures spread like veins, crawling across the ceilings and walls. At night, if you listened closely, you could hear the groaning of stone, the friction between bricks, like the strained breath of an ancient being trying to speak. Scholars came to study it, claiming it was caused by changes in temperature and humidity. But the villagers said only one thing: the castle misses people. And perhaps they were right, because when people left, the castle didn't lose its life. It simply moved that life inward. Like a forgotten body, it shrank, then swelled, then cried out through the voice of its walls. It became a living being, lonely, unable to die, yet unable to live. Some compared it to an exiled king sitting on a dust-covered throne, watching the world beyond the mist, knowing he once ruled, but having no one left to rule. The isolation of power is its eternal punishment. Power cannot exist without those who kneel before it, and when there's no one left to serve, it devours itself. Every gust of wind through the walls is a hunger. Every moonbeam through a window, a sorrow. They say that if you stand before the castle on a moonless night and call the Count's name, you'll hear a voice answer from deep within the walls, not human, but hollow and drawn out, like wind passing through a grave. It isn't angry. It isn't in pain. It's simply sad. The sadness of something once too great, too strong, condemned by its own greatness to eternal loneliness. The castle now is exactly that, a monument to old glory, imprisoned in its own silence. And if there are souls still here, perhaps they do not wait for salvation. They wait only for a human voice, to remind them they once existed. But sadly, people fear loneliness, and no one is brave enough to speak to the shadow of a fallen power. So the castle endures, watching the world change but never touching it, like a blind king in a kingdom of mist and stone, still sitting on his throne, having long forgotten what it means to be worshipped. There are autumn mornings when the mist covers the meadows so thick that the castle seems to dissolve into the white fog, leaving only the faint outline of its towers and the sound of wind slipping through the cracks in its walls. Yet, if you come closer, you'll realize it isn't vanishing, it's being swallowed, bit by bit, by nature. Moss has grown thick at its base, creeping through every fissure, wrapping the stone in a soft, damp skin. Wild plants rise from the courtyard, their roots digging deep into the ancient brick floor, prying the stones loose from where they once belonged. Every rain carries the scent of wet earth and mud, flooding the corridors, dripping down staircases, pooling in rooms that once glowed with candlelight. Each drop that falls echoes through the hollow halls like the ticking of time itself, counting down the castle's fading existence. Nature doesn't destroy quickly. It doesn't shatter or burn. It takes back what's its own, slowly, silently, with the patience of a god that never tires. The stone walls are eaten by moss, fading from cold grey to pale green, then to deep black. Wooden doors swell, crack, and crumble into warped frames riddled with worms. Grass covers the paths, swallowing the stairs that once led to the great hall, and when the wind passes through the trees that have taken root in the courtyard, it carries a sound like whispering, as if nature is speaking softly with the castle's soul. Some say it's a sign of return, because though mankind once raised walls of stone in the name of power to defy the world, in the end, the world always comes back not with swords, but with roots. Once, an old painter came here, carrying his easel and paints, wanting to capture the image of a structure fading into time. He sat beneath a tree and painted for 3 days. On the first day, the castle appeared on his canvas, like a wound between heaven and earth, a black mass cloaked in moss, pale light falling over its broken dome. On the second day, something changed. When he looked up, the moss seemed to have spread further, covering the window that was still visible the day before. He murmured that it must be a trick of the light. But on the third day, when he finished, he realized that in his painting, the castle was gone. In its place stood a dense forest, and in the middle of that forest a large moss-covered stone shaped vaguely like a sleeping face. That night, he left. Weeks later, his painting was found in a small shop, but he was never seen again. The shopkeeper said the painting smelled of damp soil and mold, and every time he wiped the dust off it, the colours grew darker, as if something inside was still alive. Since then, people have believed that nature not only takes back, but devours the souls of those who try to preserve the past. Rain and wind became unseen artists, sculpting the castle in their own way. Moss became its carpet, grass its roof, and trees its pillars. The castle slowly merged with the earth until it was impossible to tell stone from trunk. On certain moonlit nights, if you stand far away, you can still see the shadow of the main tower stretching across the ground. But when you approach, it's only a mound of moss clinging to an ancient tree. Some naturalists once came here, measuring temperature, humidity, and light. They wrote, "Nature is restoring balance to what mankind once took." But the villagers put it simply, the forest is eating the castle. Indeed, branches now pierce through windows, roots split open the domes, and leaves reach out like hands reclaiming what was stolen. When the wind blows hard, the falling leaves fill the corridors, sounding like footsteps. In autumn, piles of dry leaves gather before the gates, and when you step on them, they crackle like old bones breaking. Winter covers the roof in snow, and the castle lies there like the corpse of a giant dreaming its final dream. Yet even in the snow, life persists. Birds nest on the roof, moss grows beneath the ice, and water drips from the ceiling like breath. Perhaps nature never wanted to kill the castle. It only wanted to bring it back to where it belonged, the earth. Because in the end, everything humans build returns to that origin, whether castles, thrones, or dreams of immortality. And if you come close enough, if you reach out and touch the wall now covered in moss, you'll feel something strangely soft, not stone, but the living flesh of the earth reborn. Sometimes, you'll hear strange sounds, the creaking of roots twisting under the floor, the faint crumble of falling stone, the sigh of wind through cracks carrying a whisper. You once believed you could defy me. Then silence. Nature doesn't need revenge because it never loses. It simply waits for man to forget, then returns patient, gentle, reclaiming everything. And so, the castle, once a symbol of power, has finally become part of the forest, dissolved into the breath of the earth, blended with the wind, existing in a different way, not through defiance, but through acceptance. No one knows exactly where the first flame began. Some say lightning struck the tower roof. Others claim wanderers lit a fire in the night to keep warm, and then the wind changed, and the fire consumed the walls. But the villagers swear that night they saw a strange light rising from inside the castle, not the colour of fire, but the golden glow of 1,000 candles burning all at once. Whatever the cause, that flame rose like a freed spirit, and the castle, after years of being imprisoned by moss and time, suddenly blazed to life, shining in the dark as if it longed to live again. The fire crawled across the walls, slithered over the tiles, casting a red glow that painted the sky. The whole plain turned the colour of blood, and people stood watching from afar, none daring to approach. Because within that fire, they said they saw figures moving in the smoke, not panicking, not screaming, but dancing. No one knew who those shadows were, but their shapes were old, their garments ancient, faint outlines flickering in the red glow, as if the souls of those who once lived there had returned to dance at their own funeral. The wind that night was strange. It carried no howls, no roar, only a steady rhythm, like breathing. And every time it passed, the fire grew stronger, not spreading outward, but circling the castle, as though held within an invisible boundary. All night, the villagers stood and watched. Some knelt, some prayed, some cried, but no one stepped inside. Then, as dawn arrived, the flames died out on their own. No smoke, no ash, only a thick fog covered the grounds. When the sun rose and the mist lifted, the castle still stood but completely changed. The main tower had collapsed, the windows were blackened, and scorch marks crawled across the walls like dried veins. In the courtyard, the soil had turned dark, soft like ash, and at its centre, a long black ring was burned deep into the stone. The villagers called it the Circle of Ashes. They said it marked where the spirits had danced that night, a ritual whose meaning no one understood. A group of monks from another region came when they heard the tale. They wanted to purify the place, to cleanse the sin of fire. But the moment they stepped across the circle, they all heard something beneath their feet, a rustling sound, like something moving under the ground. One of them knelt, placed his hand on the soil, and turned pale, saying there was something beating. No one believed him until night fell. When the wind rose again, the ashes within the ring began to swirl, slowly at first, forming spirals that lifted into the air, and in their midst appeared a faint light like a spark that refused to die. The monks fled in terror, leaving the place to itself. From that night on, no one dared to approach the castle after dark. The villagers whispered that once a year, on the anniversary of the fire, if you stood quietly from afar, you would see the highest window glow once more, and within that light, a shadow would appear, turn, spin, and fade into the wind. Some who ventured closer said the air did not smell of smoke, but of incense, mixed with embers, sweet, heavy, and sorrowful. An old man who had lived in the village his whole life once said, that fire didn't come to destroy, it came to cleanse. Maybe he was right, because after that night, the castle no longer groaned within its walls. No more whispers in the dark. Everything became quiet, so quiet that even the wind sounded like the soft breathing of a sleeping child. Perhaps the fire had burned away every curse, or maybe it had simply shed the old skin of a soul that had suffered too long. In the years that followed, plants grew faster than ever around the walls. Moss turned from green to deep red. Wildflowers bloomed fiercely every summer, and above the ruined tower, no matter how heavy the clouds, there was always a patch of light. People came to believe that somewhere in that place, a fire still burned, not one of destruction but of memory. Because if a soul had endured centuries of loneliness, surely it would crave, just once, to blaze to see the light again, even if only to turn into ash. Perhaps that's the true meaning of fire and ashes, not an ending, but a new beginning for forgetting. And in the silence that followed, if you press your hand against the blackened wall, you can still feel a faint warmth, gentle and real like the heartbeat of stone beneath the soot. Maybe the castle never died. It was only reborn in another form, not as a symbol of power, but as a quiet flame burning between memory and time, reminding mankind that even the cursed, given enough years, will find a way to purify themselves through light. Time passed, and people slowly forgot the fire, forgot the circle of ashes in the courtyard, and the castle returned to its familiar silence. But strangely, within that silence, it was no longer dark. On certain mornings, when the sun rose, light streamed through the broken windows and painted soft golden streaks on the walls, gentle, shimmering, almost tender. Perhaps, even after being burned, it never truly died. The villagers grew used to seeing the castle as part of the landscape, a ruin, yes, but a ruin with a soul. Children played around its base. The elderly walked by without bowing their heads in prayer, as if the castle had been forgiven, or maybe it was learning to forgive itself. Some said that on certain nights, when they passed the iron gate, they saw a faint glow in the courtyard, not fire, but a pale blue light, like breath. They didn't feel fear, only peace, as if someone was still there, keeping watch. And so the years kept moving, and the stories of ghosts and curses faded. The castle became a shadow of the past. No one tried to destroy it, and no one was brave enough to rebuild it. It simply stood, a silent witness to time. People called it the Castle of Forgetting, not because it had been forgotten, but because it seemed to have forgotten itself. The stone walls that once bore the marks of battles were now covered in vines. The grand hall that had once seen blood spilled now held only the whisper of wind and falling leaves. Everything that had once been pain, vow, and betrayal seemed to have been washed away. But that silence was not death, it was another kind of life. The castle still stood, still breathed, still existed, even if no one spoke its name. Someone once said, "A place only truly dies when it's forgotten." If that's true, then this castle is still alive, alive in memory, in the dreams of travellers passing by, in the gaze of those who stop and wonder. What was it once? In the century that followed, a group of scholars came to study it. They recorded notes, took measurements, and declared it a site of unique historical value. But when night came, they slept in the old rooms and later said that in their dreams they heard soft footsteps, quiet laughter, the faint clink of glasses. No one was harmed, but in the morning they all woke with the same feeling, as if they had attended a banquet that never truly happened. One of them said that, at midnight, he saw a woman's shadow glide down the corridor, her long gown brushing the floor, her eyes sad yet warm. When he called out, she simply turned, smiled softly, and vanished. He said the smile didn't frighten him, it made him feel compassion. Perhaps the castle no longer frightened anyone, because it no longer carried anger. What remained was memory. And memory, no matter how painful, turns gentle when it's had enough time. The villagers came closer again, bringing food, lighting candles on special days. Some said they did it so the old souls could find their way home. But over time, they stopped mentioning souls. They just said, to make the castle happy, because it seemed alive, not just stone, but something that could feel sadness, remembrance, longing. That spring, wildflowers bloomed thick around the walls, climbing the steps. In the wind, their scent mixed with the damp aroma of old stone, creating something strange yet familiar, as if remembered from another life. A young poet passing by stood silently before the gate for a long time, then said, "This castle isn't forgotten. It's dreaming." The phrase spread, and soon people came not to worship, not to explore, but simply to look. They sat on the grass, watched the broken towers, listened to the wind through the windows, and said nothing. No one could explain why they felt such peace among ruins. Perhaps because this place had contained everything: power, blood, betrayal, loneliness, and at last, peace. And that peace had become the castle's new soul. Every evening, as the sun set, light turned the broken walls crimson, and the castle seemed to live again, not in grandeur, but in the memory of itself. The burn marks faded, the moss turned golden, the vines hung like curtains. It was as if time itself had directed the scene, the greatest playwright of all tragedies. Villagers told of a child who once wandered inside and came back saying they heard someone reading aloud. When they searched, there was nothing, only the wind. But the child insisted. The voice sounded sad, but kind. Perhaps the trapped souls had finally found rest, leaving only their echo behind a lullaby for the sleeping stone. Forgotten, but not dead. Maybe that is the eternity humans have always sought, not to be remembered forever, but to exist peacefully within oblivion. And the castle, after centuries, had done what no king, no warrior, no builder ever could. It had learned how to forget itself. Many years later, when the stories of the curse and the fire had faded like smoke, some people returned. Not builders or destroyers, but the curious, those drunk on mystery, hunters of memory, and believers in spirits. They came at night, carrying flashlights, recorders, cameras, and the restless excitement of those who longed to face the unseen. Among them was a group who called themselves the Listeners. They believed every ancient structure kept the echoes of those who once lived within, and that with enough patience one could hear them speak. That night the moon was pale, the fog thick, its white glow like ash spread over everything. They crossed the rusted iron gate and stepped into the courtyard, where moss had overrun every stone. No one spoke. Only the sound of footsteps mingled with the wind. One of them, a woman named Lyra, set a recorder down in the middle of the courtyard, while the others spread out, each choosing a corner to sit. The air was dense, still enough that they could hear their own heartbeats. From time to time, a gust slipped through a crack in the wall, sounding like a quiet laugh. After an hour, nothing happened. They began to feel cold, ready to pack up and leave, until one of them pointed toward a window on the second floor. There was a flicker of light like a candle flame, but no one could have lit a candle there. Lyra raised her camera, zoomed in. Through the lens, they saw it clearly. A figure standing behind the broken glass, upright, long hair, wearing a white dress, unmoving, not looking down, just listening. One of them shouted, "Who's there?" No reply. Only the candlelight trembled and went out. They ran inside, climbing the decayed staircase. Every step creaked, dust falling like ash. When they reached the room with that window, they found it empty. But on the dusty floor were faint, small footprints leading to the wall and stopping there, as if she had walked straight through the stone. Someone whispered, trembling, "Where did she go?" Lyra said nothing. She swept her flashlight across the wall. Beneath a layer of moss, faint carvings appeared. She scraped gently with a knife, and words began to emerge. "We can still hear the laughter. They left the castle that very night." The next morning, when they listened to the recording, they discovered something strange. For the last 20 minutes, in the spaces between silence, there was a whisper, a woman's voice, soft as the wind. "Are you looking for me too?" Then came music. A harpsichord, faint, echoing, dreamlike, and gone. The recording ended with a single sound, the clink of glasses, like in a banquet. From then on, the tape spread everywhere, drawing the curious. Some brought oscilloscopes, some held seances, others came only to feel the energy. Yet all said the same thing. The place wasn't as cold as they expected. It didn't threaten. It didn't drive them away. It simply watched, quietly, like an old host used to unexpected guests. Some claimed that while standing in the great hall, they heard faint music, distant singing, the notes of an old song, and the faint scent of wine in the air. Some closed their eyes, and for a moment saw themselves in an ancient feast, candles glowing, people in old clothes, silver cups raised high, laughter echoing across the hall. But when they opened their eyes, there were only broken walls and weeds. A journalist once wrote, "This castle isn't haunted, it just wants to be remembered." And indeed, for each visitor, it told a different story. Some heard singing, some saw figures dancing. Some felt a soft warmth brushing past. It seemed the castle chose who it wanted to speak to. As for those who came to mock, to film for views, they saw nothing, heard nothing but wind, and felt only cold stone. Perhaps the spirits here still kept the dignity of their past, they only spoke to those who truly listened. And so, over time, the place became a meeting ground between two worlds, the living who came to hear and the dead who wished to be heard. On certain damp nights, passers-by saw lights flickering inside, as though an old feast was still in motion. No one felt fear, only a hush. Some bold souls even stood by the gate, raised a glass, and clinked it softly into the air, as a toast to those who stayed behind. For in the shared memory of all who came, the castle was no longer a cursed ruin, but a doorway to another time where past and present mingled, like wine and blood in an old silver cup. And perhaps that was all the castle ever wanted, not salvation, not glory, only to hear human laughter once more. Because in the end, what still echoes within its ancient walls is not a cry, but the fading rhythm of a feast, a distant song, still waiting for someone to listen to its final note. They say a castle doesn't truly die when it collapses, it only dies when no one remembers it. But this place still clings to memory, not in books, not in legends, but in its very stone, its wind, its chill. If someone were patient enough to listen deeply, they would realize the castle isn't just architecture, it's a body. Every room, every stair, every corridor is like a vein. Every current of air slipping through carries the breath of those who once lived, once loved, once betrayed. One stormy night, as fog blanketed the fields, a traveller stopped here. He was a researcher, but above all, a lover of solitude. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed that every place held memories. He stepped through the iron gate, into the great hall, lit a small lamp, and sat down, opening an old leather notebook. "I will write about you," he whispered, "as I would about a body that still breathes." Each tap of his pen echoed through the hollow space, as if the building itself were listening. He noted the sound of wind slipping through cracks in the wall. It sounded like a slow heartbeat. He described the chill rising from the stone floor. It felt like blood flowing backward. Then he walked, slow and steady, down the endless corridor. The shattered windows reflected his light, and he saw his shadow split in two, one walking ahead, one silently following. He stopped at the main staircase. Each step was worn differently, as if marked by thousands of feet that had passed before. He touched the cold banister, imagining it as the ribcage of a giant creature sleeping. Each gust of wind through the hall made a faint hiss, like a sigh. And then, deeper inside, he found a small room at the end of the hall. The walls were carved with twisting lines, winding like veins. In the center was a circle of stone, and at its heart a small hole, deep and dark, like the navel of the structure. He leaned down, and dropped a pebble. No sound of it landing. As if there was no bottom. He sat and placed his hand on the floor and felt a faint vibration. Not from the earth, but from the walls themselves, as if the castle was responding to his touch. Then, through the silence, he heard something. A murmur, light as breath, yet rhythmic like words. He couldn't understand the language, but in that instant, he realized the castle was telling its own story. Each sound carried a memory. The clatter of hooves in the courtyard, the clink of wine glasses, a cry in the night, the ring of a blade meeting blood, and a song. The sounds didn't form sentences, they blended together, a long, continuous melody. He sat still, hand pressed to the stone, and felt his body grow cold, not from fear, but from merging with the place. He wrote in his notebook, "The castle is not haunted. It is a body of memory. I can hear its heart beating slow but steady." When he rose to leave, the oil lamp flickered. His shadow stretched across the wall, and part of it stayed behind. He stopped, looked at it for a long moment, then smiled. "If I leave," he whispered, "keep my dream." Then he walked away, leaving his shadow imprinted on the wall, fading, but never gone. After that, no one saw the man again. But his notebook was found on the stairway. The cover yellowed, the writing still clear. And strangely, though no one touched it, it gathered no dust. The villagers believed it still belonged to the castle, a piece of the building's memory written by a human hand. Ever since, visitors claimed they could feel the place breathe. It was no longer a ruin, no longer a corpse, but a body quietly alive within time. Standing in the great hall, if you stay silent long enough, you'll hear it, that faint, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat beneath stone. And perhaps everyone who's ever stepped inside has left a fragment of themselves. Here, a breath, a feeling, a small memory. The castle absorbs it all, and in return, keeps a place for them inside its dream. And so, through the centuries, it continues to live not through humans but through their memories. And perhaps that's the most terrifying thing of all. The castle never dies, because memory never learns how to stop breathing. People often think stone is lifeless, but in places like this, stone has memory, and memory never stays silent. When the sun sets and the light fades from the walls, the stones begin to change color, darkening like aging flesh. If you place your hand on them, you'll feel something moving inside, not wind, not water, but a slow trembling, like a breath trapped for centuries. The villagers call it the punishment of stone. They believe every castle carries a sin, because it was built on the suffering of others, on the deaths of the masons who raised its walls, the slaves buried in its foundations, the souls forced to serve until they vanished, and the stone, which endures it all, never forgets. One scholar once said, "Stone does not forgive, because it was made to remember." And perhaps he was right. Every time it rains, each drop seeps into the wall like a reversed memory, awakening what was buried. On stormy nights, when lightning flashes across the old walls, people see shapes appear dark, marks like hands, like faces. When the light fades, they vanish, but the feeling of being watched remains. A stonemason once came to survey the place, planning to take a sample for study. When he tapped the wall with his hammer, the sound wasn't even. Some spots rang hollow, others were dense, heavy, as if something thick was inside. He joked, "Maybe these walls have drunk too much of history's blood." But that night, camping near the gate, he dreamed the stones moved on their own. They stacked together, twisting into the shape of people, and in the dream, he heard them whisper, "Give us back our names." The next morning, he left without a word, only leaving a single muddy handprint on the wall as if someone else had placed it there. Later, everyone who passed could still see that mark, untouched by rain or Sunday. Some who tried to touch it felt a freezing chill crawl up their spine, as if the castle itself were staring back. Perhaps that is the punishment of stone, not a wound, but a memory. Because every stone has heard the screams, witnessed the betrayals, been splattered with blood, and absorbed human pain. It doesn't hate, but it remembers. And memory, when left unshared, becomes resentment. They say that on fog-heavy nights, if you walk the corridors, you'll hear faint tapping, not wind, but the stones calling to one another, as if they were speaking an ancient language, only things that have existed for centuries could understand. An archaeologist once pressed his ear to the wall and swore he heard a whisper, soft, like a human voice. Others said it was only the wind. But he answered, "No, the wind doesn't know my name." After he left, he never returned. In his journal he wrote, "The walls know my name. When I turned away, I heard them say it back. The castle still stands, silent but not the silence of peace. It's the silence of something waiting to be heard. Every crack in the wall is a scar, and every scar tells its own story. Some run down the wall like a slash, others are small, like dried tears. When the moon hits at the right angle, those fractures glow like veins, shaping the outline of a body curling in pain. That's how the stone records suffering not in words but in form. And when night falls, moisture rises from the walls, carrying a smell faintly like ash, like blood dried centuries ago. Those who catch it say it smells like the memory of a wound that never healed. They tell of a young traveller once caught in the rain, who wandered inside for shelter. He leaned against the wall and fell asleep. When he woke, his clothes were smeared with dark stains. He thought it was mud, but when he wiped it away, he saw tiny carved marks beneath thin, sharp, like fingerprints. No one could read them. They weren't written in any human language. But that night, he dreamed of hundreds of figures standing around him, faceless, their eyes glowing white, whispering one phrase, "Do not touch the memory." After that, he left and never returned. Yet that phrase spread, becoming the villagers' warning. Don't touch the wall unless you wish to remember for it. Perhaps the punishment of stone isn't meant for the wicked, but for anyone who forgets that every creation has its price. The castle doesn't fall, but each time someone leaves, a single stone slips loose, quietly, like a tear. And when night comes, if you stand long enough in the courtyard, you'll hear something from within the walls. Not wind, not rain, but a slow, steady rhythm, the heartbeat of memory returning to life. It is the gentlest and most painful punishment of all, to be forced to exist forever inside one's own remembrance. Centuries passed, new kings rose, new dynasties took the throne, and other people began building their own castles. No longer of stone, no longer with towers or moats or iron gates, but of glass and steel. Skyscrapers that cut through the clouds, offices that glowed through the night, where power and ambition found a new shape. Yet though the form had changed, the essence was the same. Humans have never stopped building monuments to their own greatness. They call it progress, modernity, civilization. But look closer, and you'll see, they're just new castles wearing the mask of time. Inside those glass towers, white light falls on tired faces, and the promises, the deals, the hidden games echo like old chains rattling together. People no longer build walls from stone, they build them from data, from control, from secrets they believe will keep them safe. But just like the counts of old, they become prisoners of their own fortresses. The higher they rise, the colder it gets. The brighter the light, the lonelier the soul. One businesswoman once said that every night, looking down from the 40th floor, she felt like standing on the tower of a ruined castle, the cars below like fireflies, and she, the only one still awake, felt like the last spirit left after a vanished feast. She laughed, but something broke behind her eyes, as if realizing she was repeating history only this time. The walls were transparent, and the isolation was more elegant. The new kings wear no crowns, they wear diamond watches. They don't rule with swords, but with numbers. They don't build castles to defend from war, but to hide from humanity. And as always, every castle has its day of abandonment, not by collapse, but by emptiness. When purpose is devoured by greed, when people see only their own reflections, every fortress, no matter how splendid, becomes a prison. A skyscraper once hailed as an engineering marvel of the century now stands empty after 20 years. People say that at night, lights still flicker on the top floor, even though there's no power, and if you listen closely, you can hear typing, soft music, and the sound of a sigh. They say it's the souls of those who lived to work there, who spent their lives under cold light, never realizing they too were building a castle with no exit. A modern historian once wrote, "The ruins of old castles don't frighten me as much as the new ones that still shine. Because in this century, Abandonment doesn't happen after people leave. It happens while they're still there. They live between walls, eat in cold rooms, talk through screens, never touching, never looking. And one day, they vanish not by fire, not by curse. The modern castle abandons itself from within. Some say it's the rebirth of the old curse that every generation will build its own prison, only changing the materials, the language, and the excuse. If in the past power caused isolation, now it's the fear of losing power that makes people lock themselves behind glass. Sometimes, from afar, when the moon reflects on those towers, the glow is cold, almost beautiful in its falseness. The panels of glass look like stone, smooth, sharp, and unfeeling. Perhaps time is only playing the same cruel joke again. The new kings don't realize they walk the same path, where the final destination is always silence. A writer once visited the ruins of an ancient castle and later wrote in his journal, "I left that place and looked up at the glass towers of the city, and I saw they tell the same story. Mankind keeps trying to touch eternity, and every time it does, it loses itself." Maybe that's the sentence time has passed on humanity to repeat its arrogance forever, and to remain imprisoned in its own creations. The builders of old castles have turned to dust, but the builders of modern ones live among ashes without knowing it. They no longer hear the stone breathe, but they hear the hum of machines. They no longer see blood on the walls, but see their own empty eyes reflected in the glass. Perhaps the punishment of stone has evolved. It no longer needs rock or blood, only repetition. And humanity, hypnotized by ambition, keeps building, keeps locking itself in, believing this time will be different. But a castle only ever has one fate: to be built, to be praised, and to be abandoned. Maybe the only difference now is that the walls still stand while the hearts within have already fallen. A castle, whether old or new, made of stone or glass, is ultimately just a mirror reflecting humanity. It has no soul of its own. Its soul is born from the hands, the dreams, and the sins of those who built it. Every time a wall is raised, a fragment of its creator is carved within. And so, when castles are abandoned, what's truly left behind isn't stone or mortar, but the self of those who once lived inside. Some say that when we look at a ruin, we are looking into the human mind itself, forever striving to rise higher, only to collapse under its own weight. Each brick, each doorway, each crack on the wall reflects what people tried to hide: their pride, their fear, and their desperate longing to be remembered. If you look long enough, you'll see yourself in it. Today, when people walk among the ruins, they take photos, smile, and move on. But do they ever realize those photos are like mirrors? Only this mirror shows what they will become. A philosopher once wrote, "Man builds castles to defy time, but time turns them into monuments of human frailty." Indeed, every empire, every dynasty, every grand creation ends in silence. And even in this age of machines and light, we keep building giant mirrors to see ourselves: buildings, monuments, cities full of symbols. Each one reflects something deep in human nature: the obsession to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be eternal. Yet there's a cruel paradox. The harder we try to preserve ourselves in history, the more we repeat its tragedy. A castle, no matter how advanced, can never hide the truth. It remains a mirror to human greed. The kings of old gazed into still water to see their crowns, while modern humans stare into glowing screens to see the faces they want others to believe are real. But beneath that reflection, what is there? Emptiness. Like an abandoned castle, the surface still shines, but inside, it's already hollow. When we look at ancient castles, we don't just see the past, we see the future, the endless repetition of the same mistake. Every era believes it is different, that it has surpassed the old, that its monuments, its values, its systems will endure forever. But time doesn't argue. It only waits, smiling, then one day blows through everything like wind over ashes. When people return to the castle and see its moss-covered walls, they're not just witnessing the fall of power, they're looking at a metaphor for themselves. Just as walls crack under the weight of years, so too do humans fracture under the weight of their ambition. Someone once said, "A castle is humanity made stone. It is grand, beautiful, and fragile." Indeed, we build walls to protect ourselves from the world, only to forget we were once a part of it. In the twilight, when the sun paints the ruins gold, the castle becomes a colossal mirror, reflecting the truth of mankind. that everything we try to keep will one day be taken not by war, but by forgetting. A filmmaker once shot a scene here, and as the sunlight poured through the broken frame, he said, "I don't know if I'm filming a building or our reflection in it. Perhaps a castle isn't just a shelter for power, but a mirror of the human soul, a place where we see most clearly what we refuse to admit." And that's why ruins still haunt us. Because when we look at them, we are allowed to feel sorrow, to feel fear, to admit that we too are turning to dust. The castle, in its deepest meaning, is a lesson in repetition. Outwardly, humanity changes language, clothing, technology, authority. But within, it's the same fearful heart, the same soul craving eternity. And maybe that's why castles never truly disappear. They only change form, sometimes stone, sometimes glass, sometimes data, so they can keep reflecting the same old story. Mankind's endless act of gazing at itself. And with every gaze, another crack appears. A tiny one, but enough to remind us that no matter how hard we try, what we build will always be fragile. A mirror reflecting a soul that longs for eternity, yet trembles before its own shadow. There's something strange about stone. When humans fall silent, it begins to speak. Not in words or sounds, but in cold, the kind of language only those who dare to listen can understand. Anyone who has ever stepped inside an abandoned castle knows that feeling. The air thickens, every sound stretches longer than it should, and the cold seems to take shape, slipping through your clothes, your skin, until it reaches your heart. It's not just the chill of winter, but the presence of memory. Because every wall, every corridor, every slab of stone remembers something. A laugh, a curse, a final breath. The silence of stone isn't empty. It's a silence with a soul. On autumn evenings, when the light fades and the wind carries the scent of damp moss, the castle seems to awaken. In the great hall, the fallen columns cast long shadows, forming ghostly shapes. If you stand there, perfectly still, you'll hear something faint, the soft crackle of dying embers, or someone trying to speak through layers of stone. Some say it's the voice of time, but the old villagers call it the wall's way of telling stories. Once, someone tried to record the sounds inside the castle. When he played it back, he noticed a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. The more he listened, the clearer it became, as if the castle itself was breathing. When he let others hear it, they all experienced the same thing. At first, only a distant echo, but then, inside their minds, images began to form. One saw the cracked hands of a stonemason, another a flickering fire in the dark, another heard a child's laughter. The castle doesn't speak the same language to everyone. It mirrors the memories of whoever listens. Perhaps that's why its silence frightens people, because within it, everyone hears themselves. People often say that when we die, our memories drift away with the wind. But the wind only carries the light parts. The heavy ones, the emotions, the vows, the grudges sink into the ground, fusing with stone. That's why places that have witnessed too much emotion never truly become empty. In this castle, the chill itself is proof of that existence. It doesn't come from outside, it seeps outward from within the walls. Some light candles to drive away the darkness, but the light only reveals more of what hides beneath. On the walls, the cracks curve into strange patterns, like erased writing. A linguist once tried to decode them, claiming they were Celtic symbols, a kind of soundless language, where each crack was a fossilized memory. He said that if one could read them, one could hear the story of the castle itself. But before he could publish his work, he vanished. In the room he stayed that final night, there was only one sentence written on the fogged window. "I heard them." That room has been sealed ever since. Strangely, even after all these years, dust never settles on that glass. Perhaps it's the one place where the breath of stone still lingers. To this day, when the night wind moves through the corridors, you can hear whispers soft as the soundtrack of the past. A few daring travellers claim they've heard someone say their name in the wind, or felt a cold hand brush their shoulder. Some were terrified, some wept, and some said the touch felt strangely warm. Because in that touch, they felt something like empathy, as if the castle itself was comforting them, the lost souls of their own time. A writer once said, "The silence of stone is not death, but the only form of existence time cannot take away." And perhaps that's why ruins like these never truly disappear. They're no longer places, they are memories made solid, eternal longing imprisoned in a cold body. Each night, when the moonlight falls upon the walls, shadows form strange figures standing, walking. But if you look closely, you'll realize they're not ghosts. They're the breath of stone, moving with the wind. These shapes never leave. They simply repeat their final gesture forever, like a photograph that never fades. That is how the castle tells its story, not with words, not with sound, but with a silence that forces you to finish the tale yourself. And perhaps that's why everyone who's been here never forgets it. They bring home not just pictures, but a sound that can't be recorded, the sound of silence that speaks. A silence that makes them, when they lay their head down at night, still hear the cold breath slipping through the walls, softly calling their name. Not to frighten them, but to remind them that everything humanity has ever been, dreamed, or lost, has already been written into stone. And stone with its eternal silence will keep telling that story, long after no one remembers the names of those who built it. Perhaps you, too, have once stood before a ruin, a deserted house, a moss-covered wall, a rusted gate, and felt your heartbeat slow, your breath grow heavy, as if something in the air was watching you. That feeling, people call the echo of the past, because sometimes places like this castle don't need to do anything at all. Just existing is enough to remind the living that time never flows in only one direction. When you stand in the empty courtyard, where once grand banquets were held, every sound around you, the wind, the leaves, your footsteps changes. As if each wave of sound is being reflected back from old memories, carrying with it more than just noise, a trace of sorrow, a touch of loneliness, something familiar. Yes, because the truth is, when you stand before an abandoned castle, you are looking at your own present, reflected through the shape of the past. Those stones, if they could speak, might ask you, are you sure you're living, and not just existing inside another castle, one built of concrete, of ambition, of solitude? Many who have come here say what frightened them wasn't ghosts, but the feeling of being seen through. A young couple once visited to take artistic wedding photos inside the ruins. When the photo was developed, they noticed their reflections in the broken mirror behind them older, their eyes dimmer, staring straight into the lens. They brought the photo to an editor, who confirmed there were no signs of manipulation. Years later, the husband said he dreamed of that exact scene again, except this time he was alone. When he woke, he understood the photos weren't warnings, they were revelations. The castle isn't a curse, it's a mirror of fate. It doesn't show the future, it only reflects the inevitable result of what we sow. Those who live in loneliness will see loneliness. Those driven by ambition will see themselves standing alone in an empty hall. Some say that on foggy nights, as they pass the castle, they hear laughter not ghostly, but human echoing from within. A strange sound, both near and far, as if coming from another time. Perhaps it's their own laughter, those who once came here and swore never to forget, yet still left until time turned their promises into meaningless echoes. And so, every generation, someone returns, repeating the same path, entering, looking, feeling, then leaving with a fragment of memory they cannot name. Maybe that's how the castle stays alive, by borrowing the eyes of the living to reflect the dead. A documentary filmmaker once said after shooting here, "I came to tell the story of the past, but when I left, I realized I was the story the castle was telling." That might sound poetic, but it's true, because when we look at those cold stones, we are really facing the fear within ourselves. The fear of being forgotten, of losing our trace, of realizing that everything we build might one day be left to crumble just like this. The chill of stone is only the mirror of the chill within the living heart. In a world where everyone is running, trying to prove they exist, sometimes standing still before a ruined castle is the only way to hear the truth. That everything we call eternal is only a moment longer than the rest. That every glory ends in dust. But in that moment of confrontation, something strange happens. You stop being afraid, because you understand that there's no need to fight time. You only have to accept that you are part of it. When you stand before the wall, the wind brushing your collar, the cold creeping down your spine, you're not just hearing the voice of the past, you're hearing the voice of your own future. A distant echo, but gentle. And that's why everyone who has ever come here even just once, says the same thing. I felt peace. Peace not because the castle is dead, but because it teaches you how to look at death without fear. When night falls, and darkness swallows the walls, leaving only faint streaks of light across the stone, you understand that this place doesn't just tell old stories, it whispers about the present. It reminds us that we, too, will one day be part of this silence. And when we accept that, silence stops being frightening. It becomes sacred, like the last breath of a day, like a lullaby sung by stone. In that moment, the castle is no longer a ruin, but a vast mirror reflecting all of humanity, those who are still building, still dreaming, still fearing, and still living inside the very walls they've built themselves. And then, when the story drifts to the very end of silence, you realize something. The castle never truly dies. It only changes the way it exists, waiting for the next person to come, to listen, to see, to continue the memory the world thought had faded. People often say, the past is buried in ashes, but no, the past merely lies beneath layers of time, breathing steadily, quietly, like a seed asleep in the soil. One day, when someone stops, gently places their hand on the wall, and calls its name, that seed will sprout again, and the story will begin once more. That is the nature of ruins. They don't die, they wait. Perhaps, right now, as you're listening to me tell this, thinking you're just a stranger passing through an old legend, somewhere out there, in the night, the castle is opening its eyes. In the fog, an ancient song rises, faint and wordless, spreading slowly through the air, sounds that belong to no human language, yet make your heart sink just a little. You won't understand the words, but you'll understand the feeling that someone is calling, not to frighten, but to invite, a calling from the past to the present. Remember us. Tell our story. Don't let the stones speak in place of men. That is the duty of those who can hear the echo. Maybe, at night, you've heard the wind slide past your window, or the floor creak though no one was walking, and you thought it was coincidence. But perhaps it was the old ruins trying to speak, not to ask for forgiveness, not to spread fear, but simply to remind you they are still here. Because when we tell their stories, they live again. But when we forget, they fall back into sleep, silent and alone. In every legend, there's one truth that never changes. Memory never disappears. It only waits for someone to lift the lid of the chest. The castle is the same. Every stone, every window frame, every shard of glass is a key, and to unlock it, you don't need power, only the courage to listen. Because the most frightening thing isn't meeting a ghost, it's walking through a place that once lived and feeling nothing at all. In that moment, you are the shadow. And when the storytellers vanish, the castle too sinks back into slumber, waiting for a new voice to wake it. Maybe that voice is yours, the one listening now. Perhaps you don't believe in the supernatural, but try this. When night falls, turn off all the lights, open the window, and let the cold air in. If you're quiet enough, you'll hear a very faint sound, like someone singing. Don't be afraid. Listen to the end of the song, because it's the sound of centuries speaking to you. They don't need saving. They only need remembering. And when you tell their story, whether through words, through writing, or even through a single glance, the castle lives one more heartbeat. In this world, some things only truly die when no one remembers them. But the castle is different. It is a memory that knows how to survive. It fades when seen with indifference, but returns the moment it's looked at with curiosity and fear, with a heart that wants to understand. Because memory, once called by name, will never rest again. And so, the story begins anew. Perhaps, centuries from now, where you sit today, will also be a ruin. The white walls, the bright windows, the sounds of everyday life will turn into silence. But if someone stops and hears your echo through time, maybe they'll see what I see now, that there is no death for memory, only inheritance, carried by those who dare to listen. So when you turn off this video, don't just treat it as a story. Treat it as a reminder that every place you pass has a soul. Every stone you step on was once part of someone. Every gust of wind you hear is a message from before you were born. And if one day you find yourself lost in a forest and see, through the mist, the faint outline of a castle, don't run. Walk slowly, very slowly, and listen to what it wants to say. You might hear the final line, the one everyone before you missed. Don't try to erase us, for we are you when you forget who you are. And then you'll understand the castle doesn't wait for someone to bring light, but for someone who dares to face the dark. Because the ritual of life is not in building, but in remembering. And in that remembering, the ruins still live not in the world, but in the heart of the next storyteller. If you're still here, it means your heart is beating in sync with the stories of the night. Hit subscribe and join me on the next journey, where every shadow hides a secret waiting to be awakened. And now, dim the lights, let your mind drift, and let sleep carry you away. Sleep well, because tonight, the world is still whispering.